then, and it's all, most people don't realize that the Federal Reserve is the cause of all the bubbles and booms and bust cycles going on.
And the wars.
Yeah, so what the Federal Reserve does is you have these politicians pressuring the Federal Reserve to, right before politicians get elected, the Federal Reserve gets a lot of pressure to inflate the money supply. And of course this does inflating the money supply always has a short-term effect, and in the long run it causes us inflation. Now, recently, in response to the whole housing bubble, the Federal Reserve has instigated this quantitative easing program where they're literally printing money out of thin air to buy up government bonds. And how they're doing this is the banks, they buy up these US Treasury bonds, and then the Federal Reserve has to buy them from the banks because the Fed can't buy those bonds directly from the Treasury. So what the banks get is they get free money. They get to sell these bonds they just bought from the Treasury the day before for a premium. And that's how banks are getting rich off of this. And the other program that the Federal Reserve has is this interest that they're paying on excess reserves. So banks that keep their reserves at the Fed get paid like 0.25% on the money that they hold at the Fed. And what they want to do with this is because they've created all this money through quantitative easing that they want to be able to keep banks from loaning all of it out at once. So what they do is now they're paying banks to not loan out money. And so the banks are even making even more money from this. And of course, you have this huge amount of money just sitting in bank vaults right now because banks are afraid to lend, still afraid to lend. But eventually, once these banks start lending again, you're going to have this huge increase in deposits at banks because of this multiple deposit cycle, this fractional reserve banking system. You have all these deposits being created because you start off with this monetary base and then it just multiplies. So you're going to have this huge inflation effect once the banks start lending again. And of course that's only going to trigger another bubble. And that bubble's probably going to be in the student loan sector or something like that.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
What's next?
And of course, this second partial audit of the Fed that came out back in October, we found out that we had a huge number of the people sitting on the Federal Reserve's Board of Directors who were actually benefiting from all these bailouts that the Fed was giving out. You found out people like Jamie Dimon, like the CEO of JP Morgan. He was sitting on the board of the Fed at the same time that they got billions of dollars in bailouts. So you have all this cronyism going on at the Fed. In addition to all this quantitative easing going on to enrich the banks, you have all this interest being paid to the banks to not loan out money, and then you have this inflation effect that goes on constantly, devaluing the currency. So the Federal Reserve has been going on since 1913, causing these bubbles, and of course, everyone looks to the government for help. And the government's always going to want to do something because the people are asking for it. So it goes and starts spending money, fiscal stimulus. And of course, fiscal stimulus is going on at the same time that the Federal Reserve is just printing money to buy up our bonds. So the Federal Reserve is working alongside the federal government to increase our national debt, and at the same time it's monetizing the debt. So even though we're not paying back the debt right now, we're still paying it back through inflation. So inflation is the tax that we're all paying. And that's why, for all those reasons, that the Federal Reserve needs to be audited for more transparency and then ended.